Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment and ask that you check me out on Patreon at www.patreon.com/CanadaEHX. There are several tiers with great benefits, from ad-free content to t-shirts and other cool stuff. And don't forget, you can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com. Just click donate. It helps keep this show going. Okay, on with the show.
From May to September 1921, 4 individuals were born that went on to fundamentally change Canada forever. Farley Mowat arrived on the scene on May 12th. One of our greatest authors, his books ushered in the age of environmental stewardship in Canada. Celia Franca was next on June 25th. A gifted dancer, she shaped Canada into a leader in the world of ballet by creating the National Ballet of Canada. Maurice Richard was born just over a month later on August 4th, on his path to becoming a French-Canadian icon who rewrote the NHL record books. And on September 14th, a man who advocated for others like himself was born in Toronto. His work led to arguably the most significant moment in the LGBTQ community's fight for equality in Canadian history. I'm Craig Baird, this is Canadian History X, and today we are beginning Pride Month by looking at the story of activist Jim Egan. Canada has a dark history when it comes to equal rights for same-sex couples. As I addressed in an episode from last year, until 1869, if 2 men were caught in a sexual relationship, they risked a death sentence. And for decades, same-sex relationships could equal jail time. Just coming out meant being ostracized from your community, and likely the loss of employment. This was the world Jim Egan was born into on September 14th, 1921, to James and Josephine Egan. The couple had found love later in life, got married, and by the time of Jim's arrival, James was in his 50s and Josephine was in her 40s. They lived in Toronto, where his father built piano cabinets and his mother stayed home. Over 14 months after Jim Egan was born, his brother Charles arrived. His parents made sure the boys were raised in a loving home, and Jim often took long walks with his father on Saturday afternoons. His father doted on his eldest and would take him to the same beach he learned to swim in the 1870s. Jim said of those early years, "I have nothing but the happiest memories of my childhood." The 1920s and 1930s was not a time when people were accepting of the LGBTQ community. For decades, Toronto was highly conservative. Stores were closed on Sundays, church attendance was high, and traditional values reigned supreme. But as a 13-year-old, Jim discovered that he was, in his own words, different from the other boys. He was attracted to men, and from that moment on, he was comfortable in his sexual orientation. Jim said years later that he never spent so much as 10 seconds worrying about the fact that he was gay. He stated, quote, "It was never a problem for me. I thought being gay was absolutely great," end quote. Growing up, Jim loved reading. He was often found with his nose in a book, absorbing everything he could from Charles Dickens to detective novels. And the more books he read, the more he tried to see himself in them. And he quickly discovered there were very few stories that had LGBTQ representation. And the only time he found something that remotely approached how he felt was in the works of Oscar Wilde. Now, Wilde was an Irish author, poet, and playwright during the Victorian era. He was a gay man, and many of his works, including The Picture of Dorian Gray and An Ideal Husband, dealt with having to deal with a double life due to the society he lived in. Wilde was eventually convicted of gross indecency and sentenced to 2 years hard labor. Released in 1897, he lived in exile in France until his death on November 30th, 1900, from meningitis. Jim Egan said that Wilde's work triggered a gay awareness in him. He sought to learn more about him, but became frustrated by the books that limited the exploration of Wilde's homosexuality. Jim said, "They were all so carefully veiled." 35 years after his death, society was still trying to hide the fact that Oscar Wilde was gay. While Jim Egan was highly intelligent and loved books, he had little interest in school. The only two classes he enjoyed were science and English, and even though he wasn't scholarly, there were plans for Jim to become a doctor. That is until 1936 when his father died suddenly. The family's financial future was put under strain and was made even worse by the Great Depression. And with no money for college or really a true passion for school, Jim dropped out and went to work on a farm to help support the family. For 2 years he made money and generally enjoyed just being out in nature and outside the city. But that idyllic country life was rocked when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. 9 days later, Canada entered the Second World War, and 4 days after that, Jim Egan turned 18 years old. As Jim officially became an adult, he was faced with a tough choice: join the fight against the Nazis or stay behind. He chose to enlist with the Canadian Army. That required him to meet physical requirements, including specific height and chest measurement standards, along with other medical standards. And that's when his hopes of fighting overseas were dashed. He was rejected because of a corneal scar he received in a car accident a few years earlier. Forced to stay on the home front, Jim joined the University of Toronto's zoology department. After that, he joined the Connaught Labs to work in the insulin production department. The Connaught Medical Research Laboratories was a non-commercial public health entity established by Dr. John G. Fitzgerald in 1914 in Toronto. It expanded significantly when insulin was discovered at the University of Toronto in 1921 by Sir Frederick Banting. And during the war, Connaught's research capabilities grew quickly to accommodate the military demands of protection against tetanus and typhus and other bacterial infections. Meanwhile, the labs continued to be at the forefront of insulin research and production, and Jim Egan was right there. But after a few years, he realized his longing to do his part in the war efforts had not diminished. In 1943, knowing he couldn't join the Canadian Armed Forces, he joined the Merchant Navy. Now that didn't mean he wasn't going to see action. During the war, Jim served in the Mediterranean, Australia, New Guinea, and the Philippines. His ships were chased by submarines and dive-bombed by German and Japanese planes. Of the over 12,000 men and women who served in Canada's Merchant Navy, 13% never made it home. But his time in the Navy wasn't just about surviving the high seas during battle. It also helped Jim be introduced to what he called the gay underworld. He was able to experience gay culture and allowed him to experience how things were different in other parts of the world compared to Canada at the time. The Second World War officially ended for Canada on August 15, 1945. But Jim Egan stayed on with the Merchant Navy for 2 more years. He was discharged in 1947, and he returned to Toronto, where he worked various jobs and became acquainted with the spots where he could meet other men. One night he was at the Park Plaza Hotel having a drink and looking for company when he saw his brother Charlie was there too. Now, through their childhood, the brothers had not been close, and Jim was rather surprised to see him there. He soon discovered that his brother was also gay, and the two formed a strong bond. Meeting men in Toronto was far from safe, so the brothers looked out for each other. Police often searched for gay men in popular hangouts by sending in young officers to entrap and arrest them, and most received a $100 fine. But what was worse was that the police ensured the names and addresses of those arrested were published in reports ensuring they were outed. This way, it was almost a certainty they would lose friends in their employment. And for Jim, his brother, and other gay men, finding love came at a huge risk. One night in the spring of 1948, Jim was at the Seraphim Hotel, a popular place for the gay community. A friend came over to Jim and introduced him to a man called Jack Nesbit. In his book, Challenges the Conspiracy of Silence, Jim Egan wrote, "I was smitten with Jack." Now, Jim may have been smitten, but nothing happened and the two went on with their lives. 2 weeks later, they met again at the King Cole Room at the Park Plaza Hotel at Bloor Avenue Road. The watering spot was in the basement of the hotel, and it would become popular with University of Toronto students for its 10-cent draft beers in the 1950s. And Jack was sitting with some friends, and Jim was sitting close by. At one point during the night, Jack drummed up the courage to walk over to Jim and say, "I've been asking all these guys if they want to go steady with me, and none of them will. How about you? Would you like to go steady with me?" Initially shocked by Jack's boldness, Jim agreed to a date. The next night, they had their first date. It was a simple, long walk together. And by August 23, 1948, they made a commitment to each other. And that commitment would last a lifetime. Jack had realized he was gay at an early age and felt comfortable in his own skin. and with his support, Jim felt more at ease as well. He decided to tell his mother, who said that if he was happy, that's really all that mattered to her. Jim wrote, "When I brought Jack home for the first time, she took to him like another son, and they had a wonderful relationship for as long as she lived." And Jack's parents were also accepting and welcomed Jim into the family and treated him like a second son. Jack's mother said, "You know, now I can die happy because Jack's found someone who can look after him." Now, this welcoming environment was the exception, not the rule. The end of the Second World War brought an increase in articles that meant to inflame the public, but not bring about understanding for the gay community. Papers such as Justice Weekly freely spoke of, quote, disgusting sex orgies and the, quote, limp wrist club. Jack worked for the provincial audit office at Queen's Park and could in no way reveal himself to be gay and risk losing his job. In contrast, Jim was now self-employed, having established various biological supply businesses in the city, which gave him a degree of security other gay men did not have. Beginning in 1949, Jim started writing letters to magazines after they printed articles about homosexuality that misrepresented the community. They included Time and Esquire and Ladies' Home Journal, but none published his letters. In May 1950, the Globe and Mail and a tabloid called Flash finally published his letters. And while he believed the editors only printed his letters to cause controversy, the exposure inspired him to become an activist and put everything he could towards LGBTQ rights and fair representation. And in December 1950, writing under his grandfather's name of Leo Engel, he wrote an article for Sir, titled, "I am a homosexual," Jim said. "I simply let the press know that there was at least one person out there who was not going to sit by and let them get away with what I considered to be gross inaccuracies and libels." From December 1953 to February 1954, he wrote a series in Justice Weekly about gay rights and the portrayal of gay men and lesbians in the media. His letters and articles were being published with increased frequency, so Jim started to turn his attention to creating a gay rights organization in Toronto. Now, several friends discouraged him from doing so, but he believed that acceptance would be attained through visibility. And despite his efforts, due to the lack of support from the gay community, the organization never got off the ground. He said later, "It was probably too early for that." Jim and Jack moved outside the city to operate a farm while also running a pet and garden supply store. From 1955 to 1963, they focused on their life together in businesses, and Jim's activism took a bit of a backseat. But then in early 1963, the couple moved back to Toronto and they agreed to be interviewed under pseudonyms. The article would be published in Maclean's and written by Sidney Katz. It was titled, "The Homosexual Next Door." Now, prior to sitting down with Katz, many friends once again tried to discourage Jim from doing it, but once again, he firmly believed in the importance of visibility. The result was a piece that positively and accurately portrayed a gay couple, and that was something that was rare in Canadian media at the time. Jim described the two-part series as fair and objective. He said, "Considering they were written by someone like Katz, who was not gay, the articles were refreshingly non-judgmental for the time and very informative." Soon after, Pierre Burton asked the couple to appear on his show to talk about their life together. The Pierre Burton Show was a TV hosted by famed journalist Pierre Burton. It ran from 1962 to 1973 as Burton regularly interviewed important artists and actors and other public figures, including Malcolm X in 1965, Lenny Bruce in 1966, and Bruce Lee in 1971. In 1964, he asked Jim and Jack to participate along with several American homosexuals, but then, in February, the segment was dropped from the schedule by CBC. And while Jim was making progress with his crusade for LGBTQ rights and equality, Jack was less interested. In early 1964, Jack shared he just couldn't deal with the growing attention. Jim said, "Activism was very important to me. I couldn't just walk away from it." He had seen some progress, but it came at a great personal cost because, at that moment, the couple broke up. Meanwhile, the fight for rights continued. Jim Egan and others in the community saw how some publications slowly moved away from condemning articles and towards understanding the LGBTQ community. As small progress was being made, though, Jim also realized that all of his work to change the world would feel empty without being able to grow old with the man he loved. As Oscar Wilde said, "Keep love in your heart. A life without it is like a sunless garden when the flowers are dead. The consciousness of loving and being loved brings a warmth and a richness to life that nothing else can bring." So that's what Jim Egan did. He kept love in his heart, and I guess fortune does favor the bold. Because in May 1964, Jim and Jack ran into each other by pure coincidence. The former lovers walked into the Parkside Tavern at 530 Yonge Street that night, not knowing that soon after, Jack would be inviting Jim back to his apartment. The couple had a long talk, and Jim professed his love for Jack. He even offered to abandon activism and to leave the city. The conversation was successful, and the couple reunited. In June 1964, they left Toronto for good, with 3 Chihuahuas ready to begin their new life in British Columbia. And for the next 20 years, Jim kept his promise and stayed away from LGBTQ activism as they settled into a quiet life together in their new home. Finding a more welcoming environment in Merville, a community on Vancouver Island, Jim and Jack began to live openly as a gay couple. Jim returned to activism as he fought for the environment and better water quality in the area. In 1981, he ran for the regional director position of the electoral area B of the regional district of the Comas-Strathcona district. He won his election and became the first openly gay man in an openly gay relationship to be elected to public office in Canada. And he held that role until 1993. And although he had promised to leave LGBTQ activism behind 20 years earlier, things had changed. In 1985, Jack and Jim formed a local chapter of the Island Gay Society. The couple held drop-in meetings, and Jim also became a member of the North Island AIDS Coalition. But these were just the first few steps for the couple. Soon, they would help change Canadian history. When Jim retired in 1986, he began to collect his Canadian pension. And Jim and Jack had been together since 1948, apart from that brief break in 1964, so he applied for Jack to receive spousal benefits under the Old Age Security Act. The couple met all the requirements for the benefit. They'd spent decades together and even wore wedding bands to signify their bond. Jim said, "Here Jack and I have worked and paid income tax all our lives. We've contributed to the pot for 39 years when I made the application, and we were told we were not entitled to any of the benefits which we paid into all of our lives." Nonetheless, Health and Welfare Canada denied their claim based on them being a same-sex couple, and Jim was not going to allow that. In 1988, he launched a claim stating that he and Jack were being discriminated against because they were a same-sex couple in the trial division of the federal court. He argued that Health and Welfare Canada's denial violated the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In 1991, the federal court dismissed the case on the basis that Jim and Jack's relationship was a, quote, not a spousal one. When Jim and Jack appealed the case in 1993, the Federal Court of Appeal ruled against them. And the next step was to take their claim to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of Canada. Jim Egan said, "We didn't start this thing in order to get spousal benefits. We have adequate money to live on." The case even reached the House of Commons, where it became a bitter political debate. Liberal MP Roseanne Skoke stated that homosexuality was unnatural and immoral, adding that it was, quote, undermining the inherent right of our Canadian families and must not and should not be condoned. In response, Jim Egan said that he and Jack had lived together for 50 years and hadn't broken up one heterosexual family yet. Meanwhile, their legal battle continued. In May 1995, the Supreme Court dismissed their case. Jack Nesbit was so nervous awaiting the call from their lawyers that he suffered 3 angina attacks from the stress. He said, "I get this pain in my chest and I have to take a nitroglycerin pill and rest until it goes away." When the call came in, both men were disappointed at the 5-4 decision ruled against them. Jack said, "My gut feeling was we would win. Even our lawyer was confident we would win. So it wasn't just a disappointment, it was a total surprise. I think when the media leave, we'll both have a good cry." Jim summed it up by stating the court ruled the couple had been discriminated against, but the discrimination had been justified. But there was more to the story than a dismissal. The Supreme Court also ruled unanimously to include sexual orientation as a prohibited grounds for discrimination in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It stated, "The appellants brought an action in the federal court seeking a declaration that the definition contravenes Section 15.1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms on the ground that it discriminates on the basis of sexual orientation, that the definition should be extended to include partners in same-sex relationships otherwise akin to a conjugal relationship. So while Jack and Jim lost the battle, they won the war. Sven Robinson, the only openly gay man in Parliament at the time, phoned the couple and told them that it was a black cloud with a silver lining. Jim said, "The day will come, there is no doubt about it, when Canadians who happen to be homosexual will be on a level playing field with the rest of Canada. What we did was open the door." Following their landmark case, Jack and Jim were made the Grand Marshals of the 1995 Toronto Pride Parade, and their case was their final act for LGBTQ legal rights. They wanted to spend their remaining years together on their Vancouver Island property, devoting time to their large garden and their 3 small dogs. Jim said of his work decades earlier, "To be an activist, especially in the old days, you had to have something in your nature. That is, be a troublemaker. Somebody who wants to shake up the status quo, who's prepared to face criticism if necessary." Jim Egan died on March 9th, 2000. John Fisher, with Equality for Gays and Lesbians Everywhere, said, "Jim Egan certainly led the struggle for equality in the area of old age benefits before the Supreme Court, but he was also a pioneer for gay equality rights generally." 3 months later, his lifelong partner, Jack Nesbit, passed away. The couple had spent 52 years together. And if only they could have seen what their love set in motion. On January 14th, 2001, 2 same-sex couples, Kevin Boras and Joe Varnell and Anne and Ellen Vantour, were married at the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto by Pastor Brent Hawkes. Hawkes had been issuing bans of marriage or public announcement of an impending marriage since December of 2000, and bans are accepted as a legal way to perform a marriage without a license issued by the city. But since these bans required certification by the provincial registrar, his actions created a legal vacuum, and in Canada, the only way to resolve that was through the courts. On July 12, 2002, the Ontario Superior Court, using the legal precedent set by Jim Egan and Jack Nesbit, ruled that marriage rights must be extended to same-sex couples, and it gave Ontario 2 years to make the necessary adjustments. A year later, the Ontario Court of Appeal ruled in a unanimous decision that the exclusion of same-sex couples was a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and ordered the province to begin issuing licenses immediately. Soon after, the first legal same-sex marriage in Canadian history was performed between Michael Leschner and Michael Stark. And over the next 2 years, 7 of Canada's 9 provinces and 1 territory legalized same-sex marriage. And then, on July 20th, 2005, the Civil Marriage Act received royal assent. It legalized same-sex marriage across Canada. And this made Canada only the 4th country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage, behind the Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain. And none of that would have been possible had 2 men not met in a Toronto club in the 1940s and then spent the rest of their lives together.
I never thought I'd know that feeling. To be in love. Because for us, it was a crime. Someone had to respond to the tabloids, so I wrote letters, challenging every misconception about homosexuality. 9 homes, 7 dogs, 47 years together, and still not spouses under the law. So we took our fight to the Supreme Court.
Jim Egan and Jack Nesbit await a verdict on their fight for spousal rights.
Hello. We lost our case, but we made a difference.
As a result of Jim Egan's case, the Supreme Court ruled that sexual orientation is protected under the Charter of Rights, a landmark victory for the LGBTQ2 community.
I hope you enjoyed that episode and our look at Jim Egan. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com. Or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.